Good evening, all. Welcome to I'mPossible conversation, the conversation where ordinary people share their extraordinary life journeys. Tonight, my guest is Katerina.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Hello. Nice to have you here, Katerina. I'm so excited. From music composer, not the music, the concert. What is
Concert
it?
Concert producer.
From concert producer to the intuitive cook and the Greek girl living in a Snowdonia. What a life journey.
Yes, I have been a few journeys in my life, that's true.
And let's talk, because you say as Greek girl, happily lost in the foothills of Snowdonia. Could you tell me about your childhood and...
Yeah, I grew up in Greece, but I grew up in a mixed family. My mother was German, my father was Greek, so it was already sort of multicultural growing up. But we were also speaking, both languages. So I also grew up in a bilingual family, but I grew up in Athens, so I think I mostly feel Greek. So that experience of growing up in Athens, I think, has left its mark on me. But then when I turned 18, I went and lived in Berlin for 8 years, because that's where I went to university, and that's where I studied ethnomusicology, quite by accident, really. And then I got involved with this whole world music scene. And from then, I somehow ended up in London, and I was working as a music producer, as a concert producer there. And then 9 years ago now, I moved to North Wales, and I live in a little cottage in the middle of nowhere in the Conwy Valley.
I bet that's the best place to be.
Certainly for me it is. It's funny, because a few years before we moved, I was having this kind of image of wanting to be in a little house in the middle of nowhere. I could actually see it, and it's crazy because that's exactly what I got now. And I've left the world of world music and concert producing, and I run a little whole food shop now in our little town, which is also something I wasn't expecting to happen, but now I'm a shopkeeper and I love it. And and I think out of having the shop, I started studying nutrition, and out of this I saw that people, not just the studying nutrition, but also running the shop and talking to people about their challenges with cooking and with recipe almost every day. I realized that my way of cooking is actually a valuable skill that would be useful to share, because it would help people. I cook in an intuitive way, and that makes it very easy and very stress-free. And there is so many people who feel, stuck in the kitchen and overwhelmed and stressed by having to do cooking every day, that it kind of occurred to me suddenly that maybe this is something worth sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I remember when I asked, what's your favorite quote? You said, cooking is a revolutionary act, by Mark Hyman. So what's behind this?
Yes, I just really love this quote. And it really condenses a lot of things behind it. We live in a world now where, while, there is cookery shows on TVs and competition and, glossy cooking books coming out every day, and social media full of photos of fantastic, yummy looking food. In a way, cooking is everywhere, but collectively we're cooking less and less, because we live in a society where corporations try to sell us all this ready-made packaged stuff that, you know, isn't. We are being sold meals, we are being sold cereals, we aren't being sold grains or vegetables to make our meal. And, you know, and if you look everywhere, all the advertising, it's all about that stuff that comes in a packet. You know, apples are not being advertised. There is no advertising budget for carrots. And this, of course, is really pervasive. And we cook less and less because we don't have to. You know, not so long ago, if you didn't cook or someone cooked for you, you didn't have anything to eat. And these days, you know, cooking is entirely optional. It's a hobby, it's a competition, it's something to watch on TV. But people don't cook. And as a result, they eat not very well. And we can see that all around us, you know, all sorts of chronic diseases are increasing dramatically. But the very simplest thing you can do for your health, if you just do one thing, absolutely cook your own food. But it's not easy because all the messages around us are trying to move us away from that. And this is why I think this quote is so great, because in that kind of world, cooking is a revolutionary act. You are cooking against all these forces of society that are trying to get us away from this very basic human act. So that's what I love that.
You are being a rebel.
Well, I would like more people to be a rebel with this very, very simple thing. You know, it's actually completely normal, natural, basic human instinct to nourish ourselves. It shouldn't be rebellious, but at this kind of world we're living, it is actually getting to be a rebel act. So it's something to think about.
Yeah, and thinking now, people think cooking does take time, and now we live in a very, very busy world, and just having that very quick takeout or even just unpacked meals, people think they save in time, and then the producers they tend to advertise them. It's like the whole nutritious meal in your door. You just like 10 minutes warm up and that's it.
Yes. Well, I would argue, though, that by the time you ordered the meal and the meal arrived and you prepared the meal, you know, the whole process is probably going to still take 15 minutes. And I'm saying, well, cooking your own fresh food from scratch is only going to take 20 minutes. So, you know, the difference in time is actually marginal. And I also think that there is this misunderstanding because people think they don't have time for cooking, but the biggest time that we spend is around cooking isn't the actual cooking. It's thinking about what to cook, is making a meal plan, planning it all out, you know, planning your weekly shopping, doing the shopping, then you get home and then something is still missing, and that's either frustrating or you have to go back and then you have to, you know, look for the recipe and follow the recipe, and it can be, you know, confusing or frustrating. So so all this is time that we think, you know, that is brain space that cooking takes up, but it's not the actual act of cooking. And, you know, I'm busy. I'm working in a shop, long hours, 6 days a week. I come home late and then I still cook. But the way I cook, my intuitive way of cooking, I've got some basic stuff in the fridge, some staples and some fresh things. And then I just basically throw some things in a pot. So it actually only takes 20 minutes, and it doesn't take any brain space or any planning or any of that. So this is how you can make cooking easier, by not overthinking and not over planning it, but learning to trust your taste and your instinct, because everybody knows how to cook. You don't need an expert to tell you how to cook. You actually know how to cook. If you can boil water, you know how to cook.
Yeah. So there are so many cooking programs on TV and books by chefs, and there's so many different books. And they're following them recipes. You have to have set ingredients. And just if you don't have one or two of them, people start getting stressed, or just go to that little piece of, I don't know, probably 2 tablespoons something. They need to go to a shop because it makes our mindset that fixed.
Well, exactly. And this is where a lot of people get stuck and they get stressed. But again, if you think about what the missing ingredient does, is it adding sweetness? Is it adding heat? Is it adding saltiness, creaminess? Is it just adding bulk? Is it, a green vegetable that is soft and delicate? Or is it, something dense and heavy like a potato? If you just look at what the ingredients do, then you can substitute anything. You can just have to find something similar. You don't have honey, you can use maple syrup, or you can use sugar. If it says lemon juice, you could use something else that is acidic, say a bit of vinegar. You could use fresh tomatoes or tinned tomatoes or sun-dried tomatoes or tomato paste. Yes, it's true. Every time the result will be slightly different. But it's never going to be the same anyway. Even if you cook the same recipe 2 times, it's never going to be the same, because the tomatoes are going to be different. Your pan is different. Your attention is different. So this idea that something will turn out exactly the same if you just follow the recipe exactly is just not true, because cooking is a live thing. It always changes.
Yeah.
So you can just as well, chop and change according to your taste. There is a recipe with artichokes, but you don't like artichokes. Well, don't put the artichokes in. It's up to you. It's your dinner. As Nigel Slater says, another one of my cooking heroes, he says, it's their recipe, but it's your dinner. So in the end, it's about your dinner and your taste.
Yeah. So what do you think about confidence in cooking? And the more we do it, it'll get better for the other things. And the cooking, it's probably the same.
Absolutely. It is the same, but I think it is about opening ourselves up to this idea that all we have to do is to trust our own taste and our own senses. You can, if you look at your food, you can see when it's done, because it's changing, it's getting softer, it's changing color, it's changing smell. If you taste your food while you're cooking, you know what is missing. It might need some salt or some acidity or some contrast or more creaminess. You can taste all these things. And then recipes become from, some sort of strict rule, they become just a treasure trove of ideas. So it's not that I don't like recipes. I've got a shelf full of recipe books, but I read them, I almost read them like a novel. They give me ideas, they give me memories, they give me little things I keep, sort of noted in my brain, and then at some point later they'll resurface and I'll make it. And I think this is how our, grandmothers were cooking. They were not cooking recipes. They were just cooking food with, seasonal ingredients, whatever they had. In winter you use cabbage, in summer you use spinach, for example. You don't need another recipe. So sometimes people ask me, oh, I would love to know how to cook with seasonal ingredients. Well, you cook with seasonal ingredients exactly what I said earlier. If it's a green vegetable, you can cook it the same way. Like we were talking earlier before we went live, nettles. Yes, you cook them like spinach. So, and I think we have lost this way of looking at cooking. And I'm with the Intuitive Cook, with my blogs, I'm trying to bring people back to that, to show them that it is really simple. And it's funny because some of that feedback I get is exactly this, that people say, oh yeah, it's really obvious now that you explained that, but it wasn't obvious to me before. So it's something about, changing our perspective and seeing that cooking isn't actually difficult or complicated if we only learn to trust our taste and our senses.
How do we do that? Where to start?
Where to start? Read some of my blogs.
Yes.
I think there is something about seeing the patterns. Because if you look at a lot of recipes, they all follow a handful of patterns. And so if you look at recipes and try to see what's similar rather than what's different, we will start seeing the pattern. There is endless recipes for tomato sauce, but it's all the same recipe. There is just a little, details that are different. And the basic structure of the recipe is always the same. You start with an onion, you soften the onion, then you put in the tomatoes because it's a tomato sauce, but it could be all sorts of kind of tomatoes. And then you put in some extra flavorings and then you let it cook, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. That's basically what there is to tomato sauce. And you can't say, you can say, I like this kind of tomato sauce more than the other kind, but you can't really say this tomato sauce is better than the other because it's entirely up to you what you like best.
Yeah, so we could talk about cooking all night, don't we?
Yes, we could. I can.
Yeah, you can definitely, because we've been talking about it before. Could you tell me, when did you want to become? Were you cooking since young age, or when? Because I can see you're very passionate about cooking. But when did you start thinking about it? Because I remember you mentioned about being a concert producer, and then now it's completely different. So what was that transition like, and what was the reason behind it?
Well, I grew up in a family where there was a lot of cooking. Not necessarily a lot of fancy cooking, because both of my parents were working full time. My mum was also working full time. And so, she didn't have a lot of time for cooking. So on weekdays, there would always be food, but it would be really simple things like omelets or rice and peas or a soup. But there would always be something, and it was always delicious because I think my mum is maybe, the original intuitive cook. She would always, throw in this and that, and somehow it would always taste delicious, even if it was something really simple. And then on the weekends, there would be like a sort of family cooking happening. We would go shopping, we would go on the market, we would, talk about recipes and what we're going to cook and how we're going to cook it. And then we would cook together as a family and obviously eat together as a family. And so somehow I don't remember learning cooking. I kind of knew how to cook. I remember when I was about 9, I cooked a 3-course dinner for my parents. Okay, not by myself. My little brother helped me, but that was the first time I remember, actual cooking. And then, I just spent my life. Cooking was kind of normal for me. I just did it. I didn't think much about it. I just did it. I enjoyed it, and that was to it. And it's only, I think, since I started working in the shop and talking to people about recipes, they come in and they ask for ingredients, and then they get frustrated or disappointed when we don't have it. And then I always suggest, something else you could use. And then, they are the kind of people who think, oh, great, I didn't think of that. I'll try that. And then there are the people who say, no, I really need that one and I can't change it. So, and it's only then that I started thinking about how it might be, useful to help people get this other perspective on cooking and make it, easier and less stressful and more flexible. But for a long time, I thought, who wants to listen to that? Who cooking without recipes?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it took a few years of me just sitting on this idea and thinking, yeah, I really like this idea, but this is just too bonkers. Nobody wants to know about that. And it was only in the last year that I kind of, got the courage together to actually say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start writing about it. I'm going to start talking about it. I'm going to, teach about it. I'm going to try and teach what I do when I cook. And this is when I started thinking about it, in a more like, okay, so I just cook like that, but what is it, what I'm doing? What goes through my head, unconsciously? What is the method? Because, it might look random, but it isn't random. So I really became a detective in my own head, if you like, and tried to figure out what is it, what I'm doing? Why am I doing things? How am I doing things? How does it make sense? And actually, I can see a method behind things. And this is what I write about. And this is what I try to teach people now when I do workshops.
Mm-hmm. The intuitive cooking, as well as the nutrition, or are you in training in that?
Yes, I'm still training to be a nutritionist, so I can't really, have proper consultations with people. You need to have your qualification first. But obviously, I'm learning all the time about healthy nutrition. But I think, like with everything, we should all look at the very basics first. Start by, cooking your own food. Start with, making sure your meals are balanced, making sure that you have all 3 food groups in a meal, that you have, protein, that you have fat, and that you have carbohydrates. Because a lot of modern meals are not balanced. They're very sort of carbohydrate heavy. Say, pasta and tomato sauce, there is no protein and there is very little fat. Just, a classic kind of quick dinner. So we all have to think about trying to balance our meals, because then they become more healthy. And we all have to try to put more color in our meals, because, this processed food is also, it's the world of beige food. Everything is beige. And the more color we bring in, the more nutrients we bring in. And colors usually come from vegetables, which is another, very basic thing. You don't have to stop eating certain things. Just try to eat more of the good things. Just try to eat more vegetables. Just try to eat more whole foods. Then automatically you will eat less of the processed stuff. So anyway, this is just some sort of very basic And just start with that, and it will probably make a massive difference to how you feel if you're not already doing that. So, and I think a nutritionist consultation comes in only after that. So do that first. And if, after a few weeks you still have a problem, then maybe you need some professional help. But always start with a very basic, and the very basic is just cook your own meals, make them as colorful as you can, and go from there.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice, because that just reminded me of a Wild Fit program I've done a couple of years ago. So what the guy who organizes says is it's not about what you eat, it's about what you not eat.
Exactly, because we need a lot of nutrients. We tend to think just about calories, but we forget that for the body to use these calories to make energy out of the food, it needs nutrients. It needs magnesium, it needs vitamin B, it needs vitamin C, it needs zinc, it needs calcium, it needs all these things. So if your food is full of calories but nothing else, as a lot of these processed things are, you're gonna keep using up your stores of nutrients in order just to get the energy. And at some point, your stores of nutrients will be depleted, and you actually can be malnourished while you're stuffing yourself with food. And, this is called the nutrient gap. This is how, the body uses more nutrients to process the food than the food contains nutrients. And this is something we don't think about very often. We only think about calories, but you need all the nutrients in order to make use of the calories.
Yeah, the nutrients are the main thing.
And
so you live.
No,
Yeah.
let's continue.
Okay, so you live in a farm, middle of nowhere, in
Well,
North Wales. Have you got
yes.
any pets or any farm animals?
Well, both of them. We have a dog and 4 cats and some chickens and some rare breed sheep, and we also have 2 donkeys. So, yeah, it's not really a farm. It's like a mini farm, a small holding, a tiny small holding. But yeah, I'm a pretend farmer. I like imagining myself as a farmer.
Pretend farmer, I like that. Tell me about your story about how you come for cats.
Yes, the story. It's actually the most important story of my life. Actually, that story about the cats. I grew up with a lot of animals around me. We grew up in the city, but, we had a garden, so we had a dog, we had some chickens, and there were, cats on the street, and I was feeding all the street cats, and I was really having a thing for animals, and the dog was really my best friend. But then, I left for university, and I didn't have time for any pets, and for 20 years, there were no pets anywhere in my life. And then one night I noticed this cat was really very determinedly trying to get through the open window at night. And she did get in, and it woke me up, and I was sort of quite startled, and she disappeared under the bed. And I was living in London, in Brixton at the time, and it was, a ground floor garden flat. So the window was, opening up into the garden. And I looked under the bed, and there were 3 kittens under the bed, just born. And, I was quite startled, and I didn't know what to do. So I left them to it, and I kind of went back to sleep. And then, the next morning I suddenly, was the mama of 1 cat and 3 kittens. And you know, I didn't plan this, but it kind of really changed everything, because it brought me back to who I was when I was a kid, when all I really wanted was to work with animals. But I didn't know at the time how to find a career with animals. I didn't want to be a vet, and there was no other option really, anyway, to my head. And this is, but this cat arrived, and the kittens, and it really completely changed my life, because it changed my priorities for some reason. So I just started thinking about my work differently and about my life differently. And I realized that I really didn't want to be in London anymore. I suddenly realized that, you know, someone I had known for 20 years was actually my soulmate. This is how I got together with my husband. And then we moved here, and then, you know, suddenly we ended up having a shop. But it's all because this cat changed the perspective I had on my life, because it brought me back to who I was as a kid. I'm totally convinced if it's the fault of the cat. Everything that has happened since has kind of come from that fact that for some reason she decided she would have her kittens in my flat. And, you know, I still have the cat and I still have the kittens, and that's my 4 cats.
Amazing. And I can't imagine the day you found out that you got 3 kittens under your bed. The next day, it is like the life changed completely, isn't it? You have to go home quicker to check how the kittens are doing. That's just a very basic thing.
Yes, and you know, and suddenly you can't travel anymore, or if you travel, you have to find a house sitter. So, you know, suddenly all my traveling with musicians around the world changed. So first I had to find a house sitter, and then, you know, I started traveling less and less, and it was good for me, because all this traveling was really, really stressful. So, you know, I have managed to slowly, you know, it took me 10 years from when that happened to where I'm now, where I'm actually, you know, living in Wales, running a shop, not having the stress of this whole music industry anymore. And the next step in, you know, being myself is the intuitive cook, because really that's who I am. And it's quite a strange thing for me to you know, get up into the limelight and talk about my ideas, because all my life as a music producer, I was always backstage. I was the one backstage making it possible for other people to go on stage. And now suddenly it's me who has to, you know, if I don't talk about my ideas, nobody will ever know about it. So, you know, there is no point writing all these blogs and then, you know, not talking about it. So I have to get on the stage and talk about my ideas. And I still find this quite strange and sometimes quite scary.
Yeah, but if you don't do it, no one will do it. So
Exactly.
yeah, and that's your why. And then being intuitive cook and the young kittens, the pet food industry is huge.
Yes.
How are you finding it?
Yeah, that was another facet of that cat story, because I think the cats also kind of made me realize the power of the food industry. And, you know, the food industry and the pet food industry and the pharma industry and the agri industry, all these industries, it's all the same corporations controlling that, really. So, and yeah, so this cat arrived. So what do I do? My God, there is a cat. She needs to be fed. She's got kittens. So I went to the corner shop and got some cat food, tin of cat food, several tins of cat food. what do you do? What does a cat eat? Cat food. So, then after a week, I thought, I'm really, want to give the cat better food. So rather than going to the corner shop, I went to the supermarket where you have, shelves and shelves and shelves full of cat food. So I got some better cat food in a tin, because what do cats eat? Cat food. And then, I wanted even better cat food for the cat. So I went online and bought some organic cat food in a tin. The best for the cat. She was getting really kind of close to my heart. And then kind of 3 months later, the cat got quite sick. And it was a weekend and I couldn't reach the vet. And I was sort of researching online, just trying to understand what was going on, how I could help the cat. And this is when I completely by accident stumbled over this concept of raw food for cats and dogs, feeding carnivores, cats and dogs, raw meat, because this is what they're naturally designed to eat. And they're not designed to eat pellets, and they're not designed to eat tinned processed stuff. I mean, has anybody ever read the label on a tin of cat food? There is very little meat in that tin of cat food. But until that moment, it had not occurred to me. It had not occurred to me at all. And I always considered myself to be, quite conscious about healthy eating and natural health and all that. But until that moment that I saw this website talking about raw food for carnivore pets, it just had not occurred to me that cats would eat anything else apart from cat food in a tin. It just did not occur to me. And I was so shocked. I was genuinely shocked that I obviously had been so brainwashed by all this industry that it never occurred to me that I could give the cat a chicken wing to eat. It just didn't occur to me. And suddenly it hit me. And that's what I did. I went and bought some chicken wings. And ever since, my cats and my dog have been fed raw meat. It's the same with, the processed food industry. Humans are designed to eat whole foods. We're designed to eat vegetables. We're not designed to eat, powdered tomato soup. We're designed to eat tomatoes. We're designed to eat, whole grains. We're not designed to eat cornflakes. This has been highly processed to the point that nothing of the original substance is now recognizable in that food. And it was only through this cat food experience that I started thinking about, how our whole thinking about food is dominated by this industry. And of course, the industry wants to sell us these products. That's what they're there for. Businesses want to sell us your products. So you have to, there is a lot of advertising, a whole machine of, selling you these products that you have to resist if you want to feed yourself naturally. It's very funny that, if you say, I've stopped eating sugar, everybody thinks that you're crazy. That everybody thinks this is like a kind of an extreme thing to do.
Yeah.
If you say
you're missing out and stuff.
Yes, and if someone says, I'm not drinking alcohol, nobody's going to start saying, oh, come on, just have a glass, it's okay. If you say, I don't eat cake, everybody will try to make you eat cake. Like, come on, just have a bit of cake. That's not going to kill you. Nobody's, everybody thinks that you can't possibly be serious not to eat sugar. For example, other things, I don't eat takeaways because I just don't eat takeaways. I cook my own food. And actually, if you stop eating crap food for a long time, for, even a few, that doesn't have to be years, just, a consistent while, then suddenly that food that isn't really good food doesn't taste that good anymore. So I recently, someone in the shop said that, after 18 months of lockdown and not going anywhere and cooking from scratch every single day. And he recently celebrated a big birthday, so they went to a hotel for a couple of nights. And he came back in the shop just yesterday and saying, oh gosh, the breakfast in the hotel, it was inedible. And, that's what 18 months of lockdown and eating, real food does to you. You suddenly can't eat that crap anymore.
Yeah. And then you smell, and when you walk past some fast food places, it's, what's it going to be like, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and that is not to blame on the fast food places, because they
It's
have
the
to
how
be
sensitive we become rather than the fast food places.
exactly, because nobody's expecting to pay a lot of money in a fast food place. So you couldn't say I'm running a fast food place, but I'm going to use really good ingredients, because that's not the business model. You don't want to go and pay £15 for a fish and chips. Nobody wants. So it just doesn't work. In order to make the business work, you have to have cheap food, just because this is the whole point of takeaways. This is the whole point of McDonald's. It's that it's dirt cheap. That's the whole point. So, but good quality food isn't dirt cheap, because it costs money and effort to produce it. And it's only these over processed things that are so dirt cheap. And, real food costs some money, but it doesn't necessarily that it costs, more money, as, someone said on a television interview a few months ago. He was advocating real food, and the interviewer, it was on the BBC, I think, she said, oh, but this is really expensive what you're advocating, people eating vegetables. And he said, well, a Mars bar is more expensive than an apple. So, apples are cheaper than Mars bars. So it isn't actually that expensive. You don't have to have fancy ingredients to cook real food. Cabbages are not expensive. Potatoes are not expensive. Herbs and spices are not expensive, because you only need a little bit every time. So, a jar of, say, cumin will last you a very long time. So, and if you stock your kitchen with some basic things, some of the things you can have in the cupboard, like tins of tomatoes, tins of beans or dried beans, some condiments, some herbs and spices, things like lentils, and then you just need a few fresh things in your fridge, and then you can put together a nice meal anytime. A simple meal, yes, it won't be a fancy meal, but simple meals can be very, very tasty. And this is all what you want. What you want from your food is good taste and good nourishment, right? That is the two things that you want. You want to be nourished and you want to enjoy it. And real food, if you know how to cook it, which means if you're not afraid to add spices and to add more ingredients, because the more ingredients you add, the more layers of taste you produce. It's like, cheap wine versus expensive wine. What you're looking for, more expensive wine is more complex. It's not one-dimensional. And this is really when something tastes boring, it's because it's one-dimensional. So what you always want to try when you cook is to add layers, to add complexity. So either you add layers that are complementary, and I always like this example of, say, a pumpkin soup. So pumpkin has a natural sweetness, and it goes therefore really well with something else that has a natural sweetness, say coconut milk. But if you have sweet on sweet just on its own, that is a bit boring. So what you also want is contrast. This is why pumpkin is great when you add ginger or chili or both, because then you've got that zing that you add to the sweetness of the pumpkin. So if you have pumpkin and coconut milk and ginger and chili and, you know, maybe some onions to start with to have a base of depth of flavor. And this is one of the things I teach, you know, it needs 3 steps. You need the base by softening some onions. Then you put in your main ingredient, your pumpkin in this case. And then you put in the extra flavorings that creating the complement and the contrast that create the extra layers. The coconut milk, the ginger, the chili, or whatever else you like, really. But if you think of complementing and contrasting, then you're building the interesting flavor and you'll end up with something really tasty. It's really that simple.
Lovely. Yeah. Sounds very quick fix, but have to really to do it, don't we? Yeah. What do you think of about being better or being different?
Yes, that's also a good question, really, because obviously if you try different ingredients and you substitute things, it's not going to be the same. I'm not saying that, you know, substituting fresh tomatoes for a can of tomatoes it's not going to be the same tomato sauce. Of course not. But it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. I had a friend who sort of was saying, oh, but, you know, to make proper tomato sauce, you need to cook it for 2 hours, simmer it. And, you know, this is how, you know, some Italian recipes of ragu, you have to simmer it for a really long time until everything combines. And this is indeed a certain kind of tomato sauce with a certain taste. If you use fresh tomatoes, you may not want to cook it very long time because fresh tomatoes have that fresh, summery taste. So you could either have a summery, fresh tomato sauce or a long cooked kind of creamy ragu. So who decides what is better? Well, you decide what is better. Your own taste decides what is better, and also your fridge. Do you happen to have fresh tomatoes? Do fresh tomatoes happen to be in season? Then do a fresh tomato sauce. Do you know? Do you not have any fresh tomatoes? Well, then use a tomato tin. Do you have just very little time? Then you're going to do a sauce that is going to be quick. If you have a long time or you can cook ahead, then you can do a 2-hour sauce. So you have to kind of adjust by what you have and want in the here and now. Sort of trying to cook a 2-hour ragu when, you know, it's Wednesday night and you had to work late and now you're home and you really want some food now. It's pointless to try and, you know, do a 2-hour recipe. And if you try to do that, all you're going to do is get frustrated. But it's the problem is not the recipe, and the problem is not that cooking takes too much time. The problem is that you must match what you cook to your time and your state of mind and to what you have at hand. So it's not the fault of the recipe or the fault of, you know, cooking being too complicated. You have to, you know, and this I think is something that comes with practice, but also is something that you have to start having that perspective before you can think about, you know, how you choose what you cook that way. You really have to think about it in that way, like what would fit right now? What do I fancy right now?
And what ingredients are available? Yeah.
Exactly. What do I happen to have? And you don't need much, you know.
Yeah.
Say, you know, if I want to do something really quick, I'll do an omelette. But an omelette, you know, you always have eggs. But obviously, if you just put eggs in your omelette, it's going to be really boring. So what I do is I I look around my kitchen literally and I think, oh, what else could I put in? Oh, there is, an onion. Always start with an onion because it really gives you that deep taste. And I always have onions. And if you don't have onions in your house, I recommend you always have some. I start with an onion and then I think, oh, and there is just one leftover stick of celery. And I've got, half a pepper, and I've got, some mixed herbs, and and maybe I can chop in a tomato, or, and I end up usually having far too many bits and bobs that I could put in. And if I put them all in, the meal would be too big and there would be leftovers. So I kind of have to stop myself. But this is also a really good way of, using leftovers so you don't waste food, because a lot of recipes, they say, 2 sticks of celery, but you can't buy 2 sticks of celery. You have to buy a whole head of celery. So now this celery is sitting in your fridge, and unless you find another recipe that says celery, it's just going to sit there and eventually go wrong. So, just throw in the celery in whatever you make next.
I know, Katerina, you live in a farm, and then there are so many different plants and mushrooms that you could just go out, and once you've learned about them, you could use them for cooking.
Yes, and this is, one of the things I started learning after moving to Wales, because here it's just really in your face. Things are sprouting on the verges, in the fields, in the garden. But just the side of the road. Now we are sort of getting towards midsummer, and it's literally exploding with plants. It's just, it's literally exploding. This is really the word. And in autumn, there is, less green, but there is mushroom sprouting, and you can't avoid them. You cannot not notice all this. And it really made me curious about learning about foraging. And this is another one of the lost arts, that in some countries there's still more kind of ingrained in the culture. In Greece, it's still a very traditional thing to go and collect wild greens that, are eaten like that. And you can even buy wild greens on the farmer's market that have been collected by, someone else, if you live in the city. And of course, in other countries in Eastern Europe, everybody goes to collect mushrooms in the autumn. And of course, you need to know what you're collecting and what you're eating, because not everything is edible, and some of these plants and mushrooms are poisonous. So you need to learn. But for me, this is really has been, I'm still learning, but I'm trying, to learn a couple of plants and a couple of mushrooms every season, every year. So it's a slow process, but I'm getting better in recognizing plants and cooking them, and it's just fascinating, and it's also so satisfying, because when you
I bet
when you eat something that you had to, eating something you had to work for is so much more satisfying than just, opening a packet, and you can only experience how different it feels and how satisfying it feels when you actually do it. But I think, in some ways, just the act of cooking is already giving you some of that satisfaction. If you bake a cake, it's much more satisfying to eat that cake than to just, open a bag of sweets and buy a cake. So even the act of cooking is already, the effort of getting there. But if you have collected it or raised it, or your own eggs or anything like that, I find it just so satisfying. And of course, wild plants are full of nutrients because they need that to survive. And wild plants are usually much more hardy and sturdy, and they're real survivalists. And because they know how to get the nutrients even in the more unlikely places. And we were talking about nettles earlier, and this is why nettles are so nutritious, because they have this really deep roots that go really deep down, so they can get the nutrients from deeper down in the soil. And this is why they can grow in so many different places. And I find this all really fascinating, and I'm really enjoying learning more about it. But it's quite a new thing for me, so I'm still learning.
Yeah, aren't we all? Do you actually grow your own vegetables?
I did at first when we first moved here, but since we've had the shop, there just isn't any time. So I'm kind of really losing the vegetable touch. I lose the plot on the vegetable plot. So I'm hoping I will manage to get back to it at some point. But at the moment, I just don't have the time, and it's a lot of work. You need to stay on top of it, or you never get to have the harvest you want. So but we're lucky because we have a little shop, so we have really nice fresh organic vegetables that we get in the shop. And in a way, a lot of things we have in the shop, it is because we wanted them. And organic veggies is one of those examples, because around here it's very, very difficult to find any organic veggies. And so we made a point to find a supplier so that we can eat organic veggies. And of course, it turns out that a lot more people also want organic veggies. And even people who don't necessarily care about whether it's organic or not, they still come and buy our vegetables because they find that they're tastier, because they come from small farms. They don't come from mass production. And even the organic vegetables that you find in a supermarkets are massive operations. So by definition, even organic vegetables in supermarkets come from mass organic production. So mass production is always losing something on the way. So I'm quite happy that our veg supplier works with farms directly, smaller farms. So the growing and producing happens on a smaller scale, and you can actually taste it. And there is a lot of people who now tell us in the shop that they can't go back to supermarket vegetables because now they tasted the real stuff. It's just not worth it anymore, trying to have some tasteless mass-produced things.
Amazing. Absolutely right. Okay, from a concept producer to the intuitive cook, all through years, if I ask you if you could give us one advice that is very important for us, what that be? Like you've learned through your life journey.
Oh gosh, what do I have ever learned through my life journey? I learned that it takes a lot of layers you have to peel back before you get to know yourself. And I wouldn't say that I know myself now, but it's taken a long time for me to be able to be myself. And the more I walk through that life journey, the more I seem to, peeling off the layers and becoming more myself. So I don't know what the next step is in that journey, but the intuitive cook is certainly, the latest step in that journey of me stepping into myself.
That's great. Thanks very much. And could you tell us, the people who's watching us, where people can find you and how they can connect with you?
Yes. So I've got a website, and that is called theintuitivecook.co.uk. So it's all one word, theintuitivecook.co.uk, and that's where you can find my writings. That's where you can sign up to a weekly dose of kitchen confidence every Sunday. And that's where, I do my workshops when I do them every other month or so. So yeah, maybe see you there. And thank you so much for having me. That's been a brilliant conversation. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thanks so much, because I absolutely loved this conversation. Everyone I bring to the I'mPossible conversation brings such a different story, such a unique and intriguing and lovely. It's all very heartwarming. And thank you very much for coming and sharing your life journey. And
Thank you,
thank you,
Suki.
everyone who joined us as well. Thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.